so much. And I'm excited to be here at another Ethereal in Tel Aviv. My name's Amanda Gutterman, and you heard from me this morning because I'm one of the co-creators of Ethereal. I also spent several years as CMO of ConsenSys, where I had the really remarkable opportunity to play an outsized role in bringing Ethereum to the world for the first time. As part of that job, I got really interested in how we tell stories about new technologies. And when we hear those stories, who's really talking? Who do we trust to influence us in terms of the new technologies we adopt? And what do we actually do? Does that mean clicking, downloading, buying, or somehow subtly changing our behavior? So today I want to talk about the story that's shared between the maker and the user of a digital technology, which is something that I think is going to actually need to change if we're going to be successful with Web3. Basically, we need to be able to expect more of our users. What got us here won't get us there. And what got us here is the trend of technology making things easier and easier. There's no question that Web 2 has made things easier for people. We don't just buy things, we buy things with one click. We don't just complete forms. Our browser has our details stored and autofills them in. We don't just see content or products. The content and products that we are likely to want come and seek us out, eager to be had. And obviously, Web 2 content and products are getting more and more that way. In the future, as we can see from how autocomplete is starting to work on our email and text messaging, algorithms know before we do what we want to put in an email, what we want to write. What we'll realize tomorrow that we want from the grocery store will already have been ordered yesterday, until we find ourselves scratching our heads and taking out our microscopes to try and detect whether there's still a teensy tiny role somewhere to be played by individual choice. And this bothers me not only because it's different and I prefer things to stay the way they are out of habit, but because putting our faith in Web 2 institutions to take care of us makes us weaker and less joyful. Weaker because these institutions are run by people who make mistakes and decisions that aren't in our interests and that can harm us, like selling or losing our data. But also because we're being made weaker systematically, because the goal of these institutions is to do more and more for us, so we become dependent and able to do less and less for ourselves, so the flywheel of growth keeps spinning to the point where the algorithms change us, to the point where they'll have made us in their image to further their goals. The more homogenous we become, conditioned to respond repeatably to the same stimuli, the less joy we will experience in our culture and in our relationships with other people, because the difference between people is key to interacting with people being interesting and fun. This dark vision of the future, extrapolating Web 2 institutions and their behaviors to their logical endpoints, is what some smart people like Jaron Lanier and Israeli academic Yuval Noah Harari worry we are headed. And I think it'll continue in that direction as long as users believe we need to delegate so much of our responsibility to ourselves and our ability to make sense of the world. The temptation to delegate our responsibilities and our sense-making didn't start with Web 2 institutions. One of the themes and victories of the 20th century was the building of institutions that would be worthy of trust after enormous crises. Such a good job was done that it increasingly made sense to trust governments to provide, businesses to offer purpose for 30 years and then pensions afterwards, doctors to make us better, and banks to let us retrieve our money whenever we want it. Web 1 was conceived by the robust and trustworthy 20th century institutions, and the small group that cared cheered as it enabled better communication between and within those entities. Web 2 brought Web 1 beyond universities and the military, ushering online the media, banking, shopping, and birthing social networking. Web 2 brought these institutions online as they were and brought their trusted status over with them onto the internet. Then, because it was the first time commercial entities could extract data on their customers, they started optimizing and optimizing based on real user behavior. Before, when users self-reported that they wanted vegetables, like serious political news, entities had no choice to believe them. But now it became clear that customers wanted candy, cat videos, and Kardashians. But most interestingly, companies learned that users would give away anything in exchange for convenience, for increasingly making things easier and easier. A large part of my training in digital media and marketing has been accumulating the best methods and learning to be clever in the practice of making the thing a company wants users to do the easiest option. The theory being that people tend to do whatever is easiest. Make the button big and put it in the middle. Use the keywords that people are already searching. Minimize the steps to the cash register. I've done a lot of interviews in this space, and when people who know about Web3 technologies don't use them, it's almost always because they are or are perceived as complicated and harder to use, either because they have more steps or because they require users to take more responsibility, most obviously by storing their own keys. They don't have time. It's not worth the hassle. Nothing significant enough has happened to shatter their faith in Web 2 institutions and send them running into our arms. It can get dispiriting. The decentralized Web 3 is our best hope of avoiding the flattened, homogenized, tightly controlled future feared by the Linears and the Hararis, but we're asking a lot of users compared to the perfectly serviceable Web 2 default platforms. Custody your keys, pay to run applications, buy the token over here and drop it in the slot over there, manage your own data, copy and paste this series of numbers perfectly or lose everything forever. So how do we compete and how do we bring users across from Web 2 to Web 3? One answer is to make Web 3 technologies as easy or easier to use than Web 2 technologies. There are incredible UX UI designers working around the clock to crack this problem every day, but even if the UX UI improves on Web 3 products, which I hope it does, decentralized products still require users to take more responsibility for their value, for their security, etc. That is the exact point. The other answer is to change the way that we look at users. The most data-driven Web 2 companies are optimizing their systems to make things easier and easier for users, so they must be right? Well, maybe they're wrong. When we look carefully, there are many examples of users, customers, people actually choosing the more difficult thing, whether it's the more expensive thing or the harder thing to use. Many of these examples come from technology. Take Windows Power Tools from the 90s. With Windows 95, when computers were becoming more mainstream, there was no customer-accessible way to make changes in the system registry, so Microsoft released Windows Power Toys, which people loved. It was more complicated, but popular, and let consumers change all kinds of settings. Today, Linux is more secure, efficient, flexible, and customizable than Windows or Mac. There's a trade-off, more power in exchange for being more complex, and a lot of engineers prefer it. Or take the Android operating system. It's more complicated to use, but you can install whatever software you want, and it's much more flexible in terms of what you can do with it. The counter-argument here is that Power Toys, Linux, and Android are for technical power users, not general consumers. There will always be engineering types who are willing to use more complicated tools in exchange for functionality. They will adopt Web 3 products, but what about the general public? But there are also plenty of good examples of normal consumers going out of their way, not taking the easy route. Take the hi-fi stereo movement that started in the 1950s, when the equipment to produce higher quality sound became available. People would buy these complex systems and learn to use them at home. Or take an even more obvious example from our time. In the 20th century, people started eating processed and packaged foods, and fast food chains sprung up to serve these foods en masse. The lobbying industry grew and circled around these wealthy interests to try to protect them. These foods were fast, the easiest and cheapest to get, the ones that stay fresh the longest in the brightest packaging, placed right at eye level on the grocery store shelves. But lately, in some markets, fast food is in trouble and soda is crashing. There's been a resurgence in cooking at home and in vegetarianism and veganism. Not everywhere, of course, but enough to show up in the data, especially in influential early adopter markets. Why did this happen? Why do people choose to not do the easy thing that they're used to doing? Because people also have a desire to take responsibility for themselves and to have power over something important like their health. They recognize that the institutions have been wrong or haven't had their best interests at heart. Cultural memes played a big role in people waking up and taking responsibility. Consider movies like Super Size Me and the impact they had, or Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma. In 2008, the movie WALL-E predicted everything becoming so easy for humans thanks to technology that we lost the ability to walk. And right now, the great hack on Netflix has started to spread a meme about self-ownership of data in a way that actually reaches the public. But we need more than that. For Web3 to succeed, and fully succeed in terms of consumer adoption, we need to start and circulate the meme that controlling your own value, protecting your digital life with VPNs and firewalls, and owning your own data is a way that we need to take responsibility for ourselves as individuals, just like we take responsibility for our health. To shirk this responsibility will have consequences, just like a diet of fast food. I really think a cultural shift on the part of internet users taking more responsibility, growing up, could really happen. Cultural shifts happen all the time. Think about the soda example, or the way attitudes toward gay marriage or smoking seem to change overnight in the US as a result of true concerted efforts to spread new memes. So here's a meme to think about. We hear all the time that with great power comes great responsibility, but what if we flip that around? A message that we can tell users about Web3 is that by taking more responsibility, they can get more power. And that message makes all kinds of sense coming from Israel, which is a country where taking responsibility is prized. Thank you so much.